Hi, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, you have the next episode of Recent Reads. I believe it is episode 24. So in the month of June, the travel and everything that went into that meant I had just one Recent Reads at the beginning of the month. And by the time I got around to the last week of the month, I thought if I did a Recent Reads, it would be the past 3 weeks, and then that's basically my wrap up. So thus you have my wrap up. Now, we are going into the first week of July, and I have several books to talk about. Now, the first few days of July, I didn't have as many finished because I was working through a very large book, which I'll talk about in a moment. And also, I had a trip down to Atlanta that unexpectedly turned into an overnight stay, and I didn't take anything to read with me. Now, I still have a lot of books to talk about. So I'll start off with 2 books that I do not have physically. One I read, well, I checked out from the library an electronic copy, but it was another ARC that I had. And the other was a library book that I had, but I had to return it to the library because it was due and I couldn't renew it. Hopefully we'll have that back in time for the wrap up. So the first one of those is School Trip by Jerry Craft. This is book 3 in his New Kids series, and I think this is the best out of all 3. Now, before I get into it, let me set up the story. So the story is this school, which is a fairly prestigious school, all of the kids in this particular grade get to go on some sort of field trip, and they get to choose which one, rank choice sort of thing, and different teachers are assigned to these different field trips and etc. So Jordan and his friends, they end up on a trip to Paris. He's really excited about it because he loves art. The one thing that I didn't like about this is there's like these troublemaker kids that they're in trouble, they're in the principal's office, and then something happens. Principal goes away from their desk, and these kids go in and they change all of the chaperones for field trips. And somehow the school doesn't find out until the day of the trips. Yeah, no, that doesn't happen because, you know, you buy tickets, plane tickets, and it has to be the exact name on it. Yeah, anyway, that's the one thing that I was just like, no, that's not even remotely believable. Not even. Besides that, this whole series, it's gone from just being Jordan's story in New Kid to being an ensemble cast, to dealing with the different things that various characters are encountering, like Drew, like girl Alex, they call her, various things like that. And they work together as an ensemble cast throughout their trip to Paris. Basically the bully, the guy who never ends up listening and is super annoying to everybody, he ends up on this trip too. And so many times there are just conversations where some of these people, like Ramon, who Andy teases almost mercilessly, like Samira, Drew, where they basically have these conversations with him where they're like, dude, it is not okay. Stop it. This is how this makes me feel. You've got to stop. And their conversations, the way that they're written, they sound like actual middle schoolers, like actual 8th graders, like they are. And I just thought that was so well done. And the fact that everything's not really solved in a picture perfect manner, that's also very realistic. I really liked this one. The next one that I read, I started on July 1st, but I paused for the trip down to Atlanta because I wanted to start a book that I thought my dad would also be interested in. And so I finished it up afterwards when I came back, and that is Across the Desert by Dusty Bowling. This book is one of the SEASL books. It is a middle grade, and Dusty Bowling has been on the SEASL list before. And I actually just recently requested and received an ARC copy of her newest book. And this one, I wasn't 100% sure because from everything described on there, it looked to be a style of survival story. There tends to be at least 1 or 2 on every single list. And yes, there were definitely survival story aspects to it. And at first, I got so frustrated with the main character, Jolene. So the setup for the story is Jolene lives with her mother. The dad is out of the picture. I think he left the family. And a couple years ago, they were in a really serious car accident, which left her mother severely injured and now dependent on opioids. And Jolene is having to deal with all that that means, and she's not getting the things that she needs, like she's not getting braces, and she's self-conscious about her teeth, and she's teased a lot at school. But she has this one online friend who, her dad's also not in the picture because he died a couple years before, but had taught her to fly an ultralight. And they're about the same age. And so Addie is really friends with her through this streaming of Addie's flights in the ultralight. And she watches these at the library. And so the inciting incident, and she's watching one of these streams, and all of a sudden Addie crashes, and the internet, the camera goes dark, internet, her streaming gets messed up, but no one believes her that this girl needs help. And these videos were not stored, they were simply live streamed and then deleted. And so there's nothing that Jolene can show them, hey, here's what happened, we need to go help her. So you can understand Jolene's frustration as she's going to person after person after person to try to get help. But she's also doing that, balancing the fact that she doesn't want too much attention to come on her and to come to their house. Because she has a feeling that things might happen in the system if they see how bad off her mom is. And so she's trying to do all of this on her own as a 12-year-old to get out into the desert. She's in Phoenix, and then the accident happened somewhere out in the desert of Arizona. And she keeps making these decisions that are so risky. And I'm like, is it because I'm so much older, like I'm old enough to be her mom, that I'm like, no, stop. It's so risky. Don't do that. So at first I'm just like, ah. She never ends up making really smart decisions, but she gains support along the way in a character, I think her name's Marty, who I really like. And the way that things happen, I thought that it was really well done in how Dusty Bowling weaves all of this together, and the resolution and how Marty and her family come alongside Jolene and her mom and the connections that they have and the way that they're able to help. I really enjoyed that. The one thing that really bothered me is, so they go out into the desert to try to save Addie. Things happen where they are getting sunburned. They run out of water. They, like at one point when she's riding an electronic bike, she falls and scrapes up her knee. But at no point do they ever get medical help. They get it for Addie, but not for Jolene or Marty. And I'm just like, no. They would need medical help too. They would need to be checked out. Make sure they're fully hydrated back. Make sure all of this, like her scrapes and stuff didn't get infected. That was the one thing, that was the logic bit that brought it down just a little bit. But overall, I think this is one of the better middle grade books for SESL this year. Now we come to the physical books that I read. And unfortunately, I had another dud, and that is Thieves by Lucy Byron. I did not know before going into this that this was originally published in French. I think it was originally published in France as well. And there's a lot of other things about the school setting for these girls. I think they're seniors. At one point I'm like, are they in college? Are they not? So that was a little, I'm like, what age are they? I will say the story itself was fine, but it was very basic. Unfortunately, at the very beginning, the art style really put me off of the reading experience. This art style is rather unfinished. Some of the lines don't connect. It's not an art style that I prefer, and I don't know why the author chose to draw the main character, Ella, like this. I just could not get over how big she drew her ears. And obviously she's the main character, so she's going to be in just about every panel. And ultimately I'm just like, This was a decent story. I won't be holding on to this book though. Next, we have the next book in my TBR subscription. I will hold it up, but the title is not visible on this one. It is, there was a little slip check in there. It is Rise, A Pop History of Asian America from the 90s to Now. And this took me a little bit longer to read than I expected, but I learned a lot of good information in this. It'll be interesting to run this through Compile, to evaluate it, because this was not a narrative story. There were pieces that were narrative, but this felt like a very big, a very thick magazine. And that was very much the setup of this, different articles, different formats, different authors, and all of it. I probably should not have tried to read it all together like I did. Taking it a piece at a time, looking at the different things, I think that would have done this book better. It is very well formatted. There was a lot of thought and care put into this book, and it goes over a lot of information. So this is a solid nonfiction book. And the next we have 2 more books for the SEASL list. I was trying to get to 8 so that I could make another episode of my SEASL project before I went to the beach. I don't know quite if I will get there because I'm not quite finished with one of them. Listening to it on audiobook because I no longer have a physical copy. I had to turn it back into the library. So I don't know if I'll quite get there, but let me talk about these 2 books. First off, we have Ahmed Aziz's epic Year by Nina Hamza. I found this one perplexing in the fact that I didn't know whether I liked it or didn't like it. What I appreciated was the fact that Hamza didn't make the people that Ahmed encounters in his new school automatic best friends and buddies and, you know, newfound family. So the setup for this is Ahmed's dad is Indian American. He's from the Minnesota area. His mom was born in India, but they live in Hawaii. Unfortunately, his dad has a very rare type of hepatitis C, and they have to move back. They have to move from Hawaii to a place that has this experimental treatment available. The thing about this rare type of hepatitis C is that his dad's younger brother, his uncle who he never met, also had it and died when he was 12. I'll be back in just a moment. I have to change the battery. Okay, so they end up moving back to Minnesota where he has family. Ahmed is not happy about this. I mean, who would? Going from Hawaii to Minnesota. It's another thing that I've noticed about a lot of middle school books where the protagonists are moving. They end up moving just prior to the start of their 6th grade year. So not in the middle of middle school, but right before starting middle school. I mean, people move at various times. It's just weird that a lot of these middle grade books put the move right before starting middle school. But he goes in and he's in an accelerated language arts class. And as someone who has taught advanced English at the middle school level, I just don't know how feasible some of the setup of this class would be, because even advanced kids, they're not going to read books over the summer, and they're not going to discuss it in the ways that were happening here. Some of them are. Some of the, you know, eager advanced kids are, but especially at the 6th grade level, I'm a little wary on that. But the teacher herself seems like a fantastic person. And it turns out that this teacher is someone that he actually knows, but he just didn't know the last name. It's a family friend, which he finds a little bit awkward. But they get split up into these teams that they're on for the entire year. And they end up competing against her to see, are you smarter than Mrs. and I forget her last name, like Gardner or something like that. And the team, it's not one that he would have chosen. I mean, he didn't have any friends, but also like his arch enemy, his new arch enemy who lives down the street is in the group. This really hyper competitive girl is in the group, and they don't automatically become best friends, which I think is very realistic. At the same time, he's having to deal with the fact that his dad is going through this experimental procedure and it looks for a while like he's not going to pull through. So there's a lot that he's having to deal with, and there's a lot of relation between the books that they're reading, Holes, Bridge to Terabithia, and the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. I forget, something like that, by E.L. Konisberg. And so a lot of things are made parallel throughout this book. So I haven't put it through Compile yet. It's not a bad book. It's well written. There's a lot of realistic things that are portrayed. It's just not my favorite. Interestingly enough, I went from reading this to reading this book. And at some point in this book, the Bridge to Terabithia is mentioned. And I'm like, what is it about the Bridge to Terabithia and authors? I mean, I've read it. It's fine. Anyway, so I finally crossed this one off my list. The number of times I have checked this book out, it's because I kept putting it off, kept not getting to it. I'm not going to go into why. This ended up being a lot more interesting than I expected. I thought that the voice for Jawad Arash, the Afghani character in here, so he's the author, but the Afghani character whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, I thought that voice and that narrative was very well done. One of the things that I just didn't care for, it's just not my type of thing, was all of the soldier talk that happened in the American character's side. Obviously, that's his experience. He's going over as a soldier. This is a young adult book. The Afghani character is, I believe, in that age group. Technically, the age that they gave for the character, the American character in here, is also sort of in that group, but at the very end of it. But a lot of the stuff that he was going through is not really things that someone in a young adult age is going to go through, is going to have similar life experience to. And so that's where like the battle talk and the behind the scenes and the training and etc., that's not for me. And I just also, it's not something that I think a lot of kids would relate to, although there is a demographic that I know that would relate to it. Thankfully, this was not an overwhelming propaganda for any particular side, which is good. However, there were points where the American character in here thought some really prejudiced things against the Afghans. And you could see throughout it that he's learning more and he's changing what he believes. But those thoughts, which are put into the text, they are never addressed directly. He never comes out and says anything towards the end where he learns about it, except in the author's note where he's like, I was egregiously prejudiced against these people when I went over there. That left me a little unsatisfied as to how much did he actually learn when he went over there. So was this as bad as I thought it was going to be? Was this as fingernails on a chalkboard for me as I thought it was going to be? No. Did I like it? Also, no. That leaves the biggest book that I read this week, and also my favorite, and that is The Shadow of What Was Lost. As with most epic fantasy, it is very difficult to summarize. But in this world, you have two types of people. You have the gifted, well, I guess you technically have three, but anyway, I'll get to that. You have the gifted who are able to access essence, and they're able to use essence to do various magical things. And then you have the non-gifted. And 15 years before the start of this book, there was a war where something happened with the gifted, with the augurs specifically of the gifted, where they kind of went off the deep end. There was this war, they lost, and this treaty was made that basically bound the gifted and made them second-class citizens. But they still exist. There's still schools that train the characters, and that's where you meet our three main characters. You also have this subclass of former gifted that are called shadows. If they don't pass their trials or they do something against the treaty, they are made into a shadow which means that they, like this black disc is put against their neck. It's very painful, but after that happens, they can no longer access essence. And it's not like they just become one of the ungifted, that it leaves these like black lines around their face, so they're marked and people know, and they're treated even worse by both the gifted and the non-gifted. And there's a lot of typical quest structure that happens in this book. You have 3 main characters who are all friends. I think one of the characters really likes another one, and their narratives are together and separate and back and forth, and different things happen and other characters come in. There's a lot of typical epic fantasy tropes in here. And there's a lot that seems really simplistic as well. There were parts where I was just like, this is reading like young adult reading level, like a lower reading level. But at the same time, things would happen that were so serious and like you couldn't go back on it, and they were like violent and significant, and you're like, wait, what just happened? You just went there? What? And I'm really intrigued about the complexity that James Islington is building in here. This is not my favorite. Ruin of Kings, so much better than this, writing, complexity, etc. But James Islington packed a lot into this book. I really want to get to the sequel. I definitely will be continuing with this. My only problem is that they're Audible exclusives for the audiobooks. I really don't like that. But other than that, this was a fairly good reading experience. I enjoyed listening to this as an audiobook and made it much more manageable, even though the print is not very small on these pages and there is a pretty nice flop. But this is definitely the winner of the week. I don't know if it will quite get to a 4.5 stars, but it was definitely close. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.